Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, it's colder weather outside because it is, after all, the fall. But what if that cold is caused by an Arctic frost? Yes, we're going to talk about the Arctic frost investigation today, why it really matters, and wait for it, the chilling effect it might have in Washington, D.C. The co-host of this program, of course, Eric Eggers. Eric, are you ready for the colder weather?
I'm going to start putting on more layers, but only to protect against your puns, Peter Schweizer. If that's how we're going to go. Guys, I promise the podcast is going to be so much better than the intro. I promise.
Hey, I'm trying. But Arctic frost is huge, and we want to walk people through it today, some of the details, because there's going to be some familiar names, but why this is so crucial. Because some people compare this to Watergate. This is worse than Watergate. This is worse than, I would argue, perhaps any other political scandal we've had because of the abuse of power, the stakes, and, as you're going to talk about, even the victims in this case might not be so likable based on the potential that they might cash in on being targeted by this DOJ investigation.
Yeah, there's several different aspects to this, and I was telling you, I think this story in some ways reminds me of like a Coen Brothers film because there are victims, but the victims aren't necessarily good people. So I'll leave it to you, the listening or watching audience, to decide on whose side you should be, because there are many different bad actors here, some of whom you have some personal history with. But just so, and you've used the phrase Arctic frost, just briefly, do you want to describe what Arctic frost is? And then we'll play a clip to show you why this story, even though it originated several years ago, very much matters today.
Yeah, well, as with a lot of things in American politics, particularly things happening on the left, this started with January 6th. And this theory, this claim that there was a conspiracy or a plot to undermine the federal government. And they were going to do that allegedly by coming up with so-called fake electors, right? This was the Electoral College. And there were some fringy groups out that were doing some things. But the argument was it was a larger conspiracy. It not only included Trump and people in the White House, but it potentially included people on Capitol Hill. So Arctic frost was an investigation that was launched by the FBI and by the DOJ in early 2022. And where this really goes, I think in a way that is unprecedented, is how widespread this was. This was not, who are the guys that were running around that allegedly had the guns in Virginia? I forget the name of that group, but sort of a small group that was the Oath Keepers, I think it was, who were allegedly preparing for some kind of violent action. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, I don't know. But in this particular case that we're going to talk about today, Arctic frost led the Department of Justice to issue administrative subpoenas, meaning they didn't go to judges. They just issued the subpoenas themselves to a vast array of people. This included U.S. senators and included conservative organizations. And this all stems from this claim that somehow there was this broad conspiracy to undermine the Electoral College.
I'm telling you, the whole thing is farcical in terms of some of the silly premises upon which it's based. Just, you mentioned it's sprawling. Part of the scandal is we're only now realizing just how big the sprawl was. We now know the investigation involved at least 197 subpoenas, include the seeking information on, they're saying, approximately 430 Republican individuals. So part of the scandal is we're still figuring out, wait, they got that and they got that?
Right.
But here is Vice President J.D. Vance speaking to Sean Hannity just last week on this issue, and he's a little cryptic about what he suggests might be coming because of the story.
Yeah.
Last question, Arctic frost. It is getting bigger, and I talked to sources this morning. It's about to explode. And things that we thought were long lost and gone, I want to be a little cryptic, are not lost.
That's right.
And they're not gone.
That's right. Yeah, I want to be a little cryptic too, because I know that we're it's still in the early stages of this investigation. But look, Sean, I think it's one of the great scandals in American history. I think this is definitionally the Biden administration, the deep state, using the apparatus of justice to go after their political opponents. And I also think it raises a very critical issue, and something that I'd encourage my Senate friends on the Republican side to wake up about, because eventually you're going to see prosecutions.
Yeah, I mean, this is where this is leading, and I think it should lead, because there were massive violations of rights. I mean, you just look at this, for example, we talked about the predicate for this was these electors, these alternative electors that apparently there was this scheme to do. Look at the senators who were subject to having their phone records gone through.
And this is a big deal, what he's about to say, because the false electors relies on states that would have gone for Joe Biden, not Donald Trump, and then they would have sent people, the theory goes, to cast electoral votes on behalf of Donald Trump, not Joe Biden. That's why this matters.
Yeah, and these were 2020 swing states. Yeah. So think Arizona, Pennsylvania, the states that could have gone either way. Georgia in 2020 was that way. The senators that had their phone records subpoenaed included Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, not a swing state, had nothing to do with alternative electors. Bill Hagerty, Tennessee, same thing. Josh Hawley, Missouri. Missouri was a solid Republican state. Dan Sullivan, Alaska. Alaska was not a swing state. There were no fake electors. Tommy Tuberville from that swing state of Alabama. No, I don't think so. Ron Johnson, Wisconsin. Wisconsin was a swing state. But Senator Lummis from Wyoming, not a swing state. Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee. The point is that...
Also Ted Cruz and Rick Scott, Texas and Florida, not swing states.
Exactly. I mean, so the entire predicate of this, the rationale was we're concerned about this effort to subvert the Electoral College. But the people they subpoena had absolutely nothing to do with any alternative electors. They weren't even from those swing states.
And the best part about this is they subpoenaed Ted Cruz's landline. So the idea is is Ted Cruz this boss that's running somehow the covert January 6th related operation?
Right.
He's in a smoky room from his desk. He's
right.
Then we're gonna do this, guys.
Right. Exactly.
And so to your point, the fact that they aren't related to swing states has led Republican senators or other observers to say this is a de facto an enemies list.
Yes.
You weren't actually interested in pursuing this specific investigation. You were interested in trying to collect as much information as possible on behalf of political opponents. Now, where have we heard that charge before, Peter Schweizer?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this was the enemies list from Richard Nixon. I would argue this is worse. I mean, I'm not saying Watergate was great, but the point with Watergate was they basically hired guys, ex-intelligence guys that used to work with the mafia, to break into the Democratic National Committee headquarters to try to find information. In this particular case, today with Arctic Frost, they didn't hire middle guys to do it. They didn't hire somebody else. They just said, we're going to use the government to do it. We're going to use taxpayer money. We're going to use the arm of the law to weaponize it. And what do these people have in common? What does Josh Hawley, Marsha Blackburn, Ron Johnson, Tommy Tuberville? They were all very strong critics of the Biden administration, what the Biden administration was doing. And the interesting thing is these subpoenas were issued. One company cooperated and one did not.
Yeah. So the subpoenas were issued by Jack Smith. And just to finish the Watergate point, the scandal in Watergate, for those of you that maybe don't remember or have never learned that much about it, was the Nixon administration initially distanced themselves from the break-in.
Right.
And then due to continual reporting by the Washington Post reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, they were able to prove, no, the Nixon administration was actually directly involved, or the Nixon campaign. In this case, there is no separation from the Biden administration in this effort. The guy was operating at the behest of Joe Biden.
Yeah, they owned it. They said, we absolutely did this.
So that's just kind of a fun thing. So these subpoenas were issued by Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, and then, two different phone companies. There's Verizon and there's AT&T. Verizon is getting in some trouble from some people, including Rick Scott, because they cooperated and they provided the records. AT&T said, we don't think so. Now, Verizon since has said, well, we thought they were at the time facially valid and they contained only phone numbers, not names, but they now say, this is Verizon, with the benefit of hindsight and recent discussions with the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, Verizon's modified their policies so that it puts up more of a challenge to law enforcement requests.
Yeah. Well, and look, I kind of sympathize with these companies, right? If the Department of Justice comes to you and says, we're issuing this subpoena, you're afraid, first of all, if we don't cooperate, are they going to target us with something? I mean, these abuses have happened in the past. But the issue at the heart of this are constitutional, right? I mean, these are elected officials from the legislative branch. They've been accused of no criminal conduct. They are actually in session, so you have the speech and debate clause of the Constitution. They're protected by that. And basically the DOJ says, well, screw it. We're going to issue it anyway. What I find interesting now in the story is at the beginning, we have some familiar names that start to emerge. Mm-hmm. So we find out that Arctic Frost was initiated really at the headwaters of it at the DOJ FBI, was a very familiar name to those who have been following corruption at the FBI, and that's Tim Thibault. Not the football player, the FBI agent. He's the guy that initiated Arctic Frost. And here's what I find so interesting about this, because we have a history with Tim Thibault. Thibault was very reluctant to investigate anything involving corruption by the Bidens or by the Clintons. He is the one that we now know that helped kill off the Clinton Foundation investigations in 2016. There were 5 field offices that were looking into it. He killed that off.
Which has been disclosed, that one of the benefits of having people that are friendly in the FBI now is they're like openly disclosing this information. So we've seen emails, we've seen communications. So that's not speculation, that's been reported, that's out there.
Exactly right.
He killed it.
Exactly. He killed the Clinton Foundation investigation. The Hunter Biden situation, he actually worked very aggressively to try to and effectively kill off the Biden corruption investigation. I have reasons to believe, based on a New York Times article, that he outed me as somebody who had been a source for the FBI in the Biden corruption investigations. But we also know that Tony Bobulinski, remember Tony, he came with his phone communications that he had with Hunter Biden. Remember the communications about the big guy? He brought those to the FBI. Who did he bring them to? Tim Thibault. What did Thibault do? He didn't share them with anybody at the FBI. He basically covered them up. And the Hunter Biden laptop investigation.
Which he got when?
Yes, he got that. They got the laptop in late 2019. They commenced analyzing, I'll put that in air quotes, analyzing the laptop in August of 2020. So they waited, effectively, 9 or 10 months to actually look at the laptop before the election. And he deemed that there was nothing to see here. So that's important. Why? Because here's a guy who is not aggressive, who has shied away from investigating powerful people when they're Democrats. Now comes Arctic Frost, and this guy is like a hammer. He's out there aggressively pushing this from the beginning, and he gets an assist from another familiar name, Judge Boasberg.
Yeah, you may recall we did a podcast before on the effort to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members, and the judge who signed off, or who has been kind of working to block that effort, in fact, there's news on that this week, is this Judge Boasberg. And he happens to be, James Boasberg, the same one who, when Jack Smith went and got the phone records, he had an assist from this judge, this Obama-appointed judge, who not only did not stop Jack Smith from getting these phone records, but he apparently, in violation of some law, says a gag order was in place so that the senators weren't notified that their phone records were given to the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
So Rick Scott says in doing this, Boasberg made findings that they might destroy, quote, evidence. So the idea is these sitting senators are going to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses.
Yeah. Ted Cruz is going to burn documents in his office,
yeah.
is what I guess they're claiming.
So Rick Scott says the mere suggestion of impropriety is insulting and offensive, but more importantly, he says the gag order, which Boasberg issued, appears to have violated Section 6628C, which, of course, you're very familiar with.
Why don't you remind me?
You're not familiar with it? How can we even talk about this? It says that any provider for a Senate office shall not be barred through operation of any court order or statutory provision from notifying the Senate office of any legal process seeking disclosure of Senate data of the Senate office. So they're saying, look, this thing was not okay from the jump. Not only was it shady and seemed politically motivated, but it violated the law.
Yeah. So what's going on here? What's going on here is you have a witch hunt carried out by Tim Thibault, who had no interest in investigating any corruption involving the Clintons, involving the Bidens, but very aggressively sees an opportunity with January 6th to say, you know what, let's actually get the phone records of some of these senators and see what else we can find. And you get the same thing from Jack Smith, and you have Judge Boasberg, who has been a thorn in the side of the Trump administration from the beginning, trying to effectively cover up and prevent senators from knowing that this is actually taking place. And this is all being done by the party in power against their political opponents. They are using the Department of Justice to monitor and try to dig up dirt through the government apparatus on their political opponents. And I think we're going to learn more. I think it's going to go beyond the phone records. I think it's going to go beyond some of the other stuff that's reported. I think we're going to find out that there are other shoes to drop in this area as well.
Well, that seems to be what J.D. Vance and Sean Hannity were alluding to. And I think that there's evidence that it wasn't just Verizon, for whatever it's worth. And Republicans, if there are more shoes to drop, it's because Republicans are going on offense on this story. The Attorney General of Florida, James Uthmeier, announced that he's entering a probe with J.P. Morgan, because J.P. Morgan, in response to some of these same allegations, they say that J.P. Morgan debanked Trump Media and Technology Group, and they're also accused in the state of Florida of providing the Department of Justice with their financial records, despite what James Uthmeier, the Attorney General, says was a lack of probable cause. So it just shows you, when the feds come knocking, these major corporations seem inclined to cooperate. So the Republicans are saying that's not okay. We're going to hold people accountable who didn't protect their clients. So they are going on offense. But some of their efforts to go on offense are, to some people, Peter Schweizer, let's call it offensive.
Yeah, quite offensive. Never underestimate the ability of a politician, particularly a Republican politician, to take a great opportunity and destroy it, which is exactly what happened in this case. So we've laid out what happened. It seems to be a clear consensus that this was massive overreach, that rights were violated. And by the way, should sending a chilling effect to everybody, not just politicians, because what this shows is they can use the ability of government to survey just about anybody. You know, you used this phrase earlier, no one is too big to survey. And that is, I think, a reality that we all have to confront. But so given all of that, what do these Republican senators do? At least some of them, not all of them. What do? They decide to insert in the bill to reopen government, right, which had been shut for 40 days. Government workers aren't getting paid, military pay. They're having to scratch money together to try to get people paid. What do? They add a clause to the legislation to open government that'll allow senators who are the subject of this to do what?
To get paid, and to get paid handsomely. And why this is so terrible is literally the debate about the government reopening was the Republicans all said, look, we want to do what do they want? A clean CR. Yeah. They wanted nothing extra, just literally a clean continuing resolution bill.
Define clean.
Well. So, I mean, listen, House Appropriations Chairman Tom Cole said he was, quote, surprised
you think?
when they got the Senate version to see a provision that said any senator whose Senate data or the Senate data of whose Senate office has been acquired, subpoenas searched, access disclosed, has the ability to file a lawsuit against the federal government for which they can be compensated up to $500,000 for each violation.
So theoretically, if there were a couple subpoenas submitted, you're looking at maybe a cool $1 million.
No, absolutely. And so the House Republicans were like, wait, what? But by the time it got to the House, and they're like, we're getting ready to do this thing. So they're kind of forced to hold their nose. And so it's still in there. And so
but I mean, they'd be so embarrassed. They wouldn't actually take the money, would they?
Well, just the House Republicans were like, look, I've been asking questions on this since last night. And I'll tell you, I don't think that Senate leadership shared with the leadership of the House what they were doing. Yeah. So the House Republicans like, don't look at me. Austin Scott says, I think it's poorly worded, but I'm glad that other people were paying attention and read the legislation, were able to explain it. So the House is like, look, this is not a good look. And so to your point, so how are the senators, because it's kind of one of those that had to come from one of the 8, right, or one of the 10. Yep. Dan Sullivan says he does not plan on suing and is supportive of the House provision to repeal it. Bill Hagerty says he wants accountability for Jack Smith, but I don't want and am not seeking damages for myself paid with taxpayer dollars.
Fair enough.
Hawley said the measure was a bad idea.
Good.
Marshall Blackburn is less offended by it. Senator Blackburn's plan has always been to seek a declaratory judgment, but not monetary damages. Ron Johnson says he has no plans at this time to sue. And then there's Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham said...
God bless Lindsey Graham.
Like, is Lindsey poor? Like, I mean, Lindsey's been in the Senate for a while. Yeah. He says he's very much for the idea that if you've been wronged, there should be a remedy. Asked if he would file a lawsuit, he responded, "Oh, definitely. And if you think I'm going to settle this thing for $1 million, no. I want to make it so painful no one ever does this again."
Yeah, right. It's in the name of justice, right? I mean, this is the kind of crap that people get very cynical about, these very important, difficult issues, and they think it becomes a money grab. And for some people, apparently is a money grab. I think we need to hold their feet to the fire. I'm glad to hear there's a lot of people you mentioned that I respect greatly, Ron Johnson, Marsha Blackburn, that I think are saying the right thing. I have no problem if you want to sue, you want to get justice, but come on, you should not be getting rich by getting $500,000 or $1 million payments because of these cases.
Well, and especially when you consider that the bill was meant to reopen the government, which its primary function was to do what? Restore funding for the federal employees who'd gone without a paycheck for 43 some odd days.
Yeah.
So the idea that senators are using this opportunity to get regular Americans' paychecks back in their bank accounts to put more money in their own bank accounts is, as the kids would say, not a good look.
Yeah. The thing that I don't understand is, do they actually know who actually did it? I mean, somebody actually had to do it, right? And presumably Thune, the leader in the Senate, had to know about it. So do we know who did it?
And the thing is, it would be really clever if like the Democrats did it and made the Republicans blame for it. But I don't think that's what happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're smart enough to do that. But hey, you never know.
But your point, the Republicans run the Senate, so they had to sign off on it.
Yeah, somebody had to put it in there. Well, we're going to keep watching this as we always do. We're looking at the abuse of power by government from so many different angles. They can enrich themselves. They can target you. They can extort you. And they can, in fact, now surveil you. And they're prepared to surveil the most powerful people in the country and think they can do it without paying a price. Any final thoughts you have? Where do you think this story is going? Do you think J.D. Vance is correct that we're actually going to see prosecutions? Again, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like there were rights and processes that were violated here. If that's the case, do you think we're actually going to see lawsuits?
Yeah, I think so. I think they realize this is not an issue most American people are okay with. The compensation piece, it remains quite appalling that our taxpayer money can go to having officials spy on people we elect, and then we end up having to pay for it because they're upset about it. But I do think, there's one thing that Republican officials and Trump officials seem to recognize is that the American people want actual accountability. They want justice, and they're tired of like the empty rhetoric. So I don't think that they would be teasing language about prosecutions if they didn't seem prepared to deliver on it. I don't think they should do prosecutions just to please the masses, but if actual laws were violated, then I think that's what the American people care about.
Yeah, well, and I think the American people also care about the fact that we're starting to fully understand what happened under the Biden administration. It's not history that we can just ignore, because this is the roadmap. This is the play map that they're going to use going forward in how they're going to govern when they come to power again. And at some point they're probably going to come to power again. So we need to continue to watch this and monitor it. That's one of the things we've always done, and we're going to continue to do.
Well, let me just say, like as a final thought, just to continue the Watergate parallels, one key difference, in addition to the fact that the Nixon administration pretended like they didn't have anything to do with it, the Biden administration clearly embraced it. Watergate was Watergate because regular journalists cared, and they spent years going after that. It didn't really happen here.
Right. It was a Senate committee, and the mainstream media has not really reported a whole lot on this, which tell you about the terrible state of the media today. Well, we appreciate you, as always, taking your valuable time to listen to this podcast. You can go to thedrilldown.com to see the kind of work and research that we're doing. And also, please subscribe to this podcast. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.